Hey guys, human rights attorney Lee Dundas here. I want to talk to you a little bit today about the various lawsuits that are going on, the state of our republic, what our job is come January 6th, and some of the personnel changes that we've seen of late. But before I get to any of that, the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that we really need to stay the course. We need to have endurance like you would see in a triathlete. I think soldiers who've been to war have this. I think certain lawyers, because we're used to fighting cases that last 10 years, battles that go on forever, have this. But I think the average citizen is not used to getting up and doing something that takes a decade or a year. But we need to really cultivate that endurance. At no point anywhere in a war has a soldier had a bad day, lost a battle, and gone, wow, that sucked. I think I'm going to grab my guns and my other toys and go home now. First of all, he's not allowed to, which helps. But second of all, that's just not the mentality. The mentality is you go to battle. There's lots of battles. You're going to lose some. It's a fact. And you get up the next day to keep fighting because you're in a war, not a single battle. And that is what we need to remember with all of these personnel changes we're seeing, with all of the conflicting data that's coming out, with all of the lawsuits, some that go, some that don't go, some get dismissed. It's not the end of the world. The game is not over, and we just need to stay the course. Okay, so moving to a recap of lawsuits. As many of you know, a couple weeks ago now, the Michigan case that ordered the forensic audit of various Dominion servers in certain counties came out. The report came out of that, and what we saw is that certain counties had a 68.5% error rate. To put that in more simple terms, it was a 2,000% greater than what is allowable error rate. What's allowed under federal election law is 0.0008%, and what we had was almost 70%. So that's a problem. You can't have election integrity when you've got 2,000% greater than allowable error rates going on. Also in recent days, in the past week or two, we've seen the Dominion execs come out and admit that their machines can, in fact, talk to the internet. After saying that couldn't happen, they've now admitted it could. In Arizona, we had the Senate Judiciary Committee right around the time the Michigan forensic audit got done say, hey, we're going to do the same. It issued 2 subpoenas to Maricopa County saying we're going to do a full forensic audit on the Dominion servers. And what do we see now? We see Maricopa County Board of Commissioners fighting that. I got to say, nothing screams guilt like telling a Senate Judiciary Committee to take a hike after they give you a subpoena for your servers. Wisconsin, lawmakers brought a suit recently. They've been joined by lawmakers in Michigan now to block the electors in certain states from getting counted by Pence on the 6th. Also in Wisconsin, what we saw was the Supreme Court outlining a path by which absentee ballots could be challenged based on false claims that somebody was indefinitely confined and needed a mail-in ballot. The rules in that state are very specific. What you see there, sorry about that. What you see in Wisconsin is the fact that you're not allowed to get an absentee ballot unless you're basically like a quadriplegic or something like that. You can't just say, wow, I think I'd rather mail it in this year and I'm scared of COVID, and get a ballot and create fraud like that. So there is a path there that should invalidate a whole lot, and the margin of disputed ballots in that state is very tiny. All right, Rudy Giuliani came out a few days ago on Christmas or roundabouts that time and said, and I quote, "We have considerable movement in Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin towards decertification of election results amid a growing body of evidence of election fraud." So starting after Christmas, it's going to really blow up, because the evidence that all of these crooked TV networks, newspapers, big tech, and the Democratic Party have been giving you is false. And you are going to find that out all at once, and it is going to be very shocking to the whole darn country. So we're supposed to be seeing a lot more action on the judicial end of things, the legal end of things shortly. So now I want to transition to personnel issues, personnel changes, if you will. If we wind back the clock in time a bit, what we will notice is that we had Krebs, who was the director of Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, get fired by Trump some time ago now, along with his number 2 guy, Matt Travis, resigned shortly thereafter. And then we had Esper, who was the Secretary of Defense. And in his place, what I want you to focus on are who have been replacing these people. In the place of Esper as Secretary of Defense, we now have Chris Miller. Who is Chris Miller? He is a national counterterrorism expert. He was a Green Beret special operations guy who deployed to both Iraq and Afghanistan. And as his first order of business, or certainly one of the first orders of business, he stood up and said, I'm going to have SOCOM, Special Operations Command, reporting directly to me for the foreseeable future. And then he gave a speech where he said special operations guys understand, quote, the fundamental nature of war, and they remain committed to defeating every threat, and they are undeterred by the high price of victory. As I said in a prior little spiel I did, I find that is interesting, given that we're not at war, right? And they're talking about defeating every threat and not saying where. And he closed that speech with De Oppresso Liber, which is the Army motto, and it stands for, quote, from being an oppressed man to being a free man. Do I think that there's something symbolic going on there? Yeah, I do. Who is his second in command? His second in command is Kash Patel. Who is Kash Patel? A lawyer who worked for the Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee, who's been at the White House working there since February, before he was installed in this position. He authored the memo that accused both Department of Justice and FBI of not doing their jobs in connection with 2016 interference and Trump, and he worked as a counterterrorism prosecutor for the Department of Justice. Flynn was recently pardoned. Of course, everybody's heard that in recent weeks, and came out in an interview that was entitled Foreign Intelligence Agencies Were Monitoring the U.S. Election and Are Willing to Provide Information to Trump. And in that interview, he said, and I quote, we have evidence now of foreign countries and the fact that they were watching the attacks on our election system, our election process on the 3rd of November. He went on to say, so we have that evidence. We received it today, and the foreign governments are, quote, willing to provide that directly to the president. So this was an interview that came out a couple of days ago. All right, and then what do we have with the Attorney General? Barr, of course, is stepping down, has stepped down now, and who was he replaced with? Jeff Rosen. In Jeff Rosen, prior to his new position as acting Attorney General, in August, what did Jeff Rosen do? He warned that foreign powers may attempt to influence the November election. He gave a speech where he talked about Russian Internet Research Agency's foreign election interference. And he went on in that speech to say, and I quote, as to boldness, as the FBI director has recently pointed out, the People's Republic of China has been engaged in a, quote, highly sophisticated malign foreign influence campaign using bribery, blackmail, and other malign tactics to influence our year-round policymaking, which certainly has implications for our elections. Who is the Deputy Acting Attorney General now under Rosen? That is a guy by the name of Richard Donahue. Who's Donahue? Well, he's a former U.S. attorney, of course, who oversaw prosecutions of who or what? The Chinese telecommunications giant, Huawei, and the Nexium sex cult, where the leaders were sent away on charges of sex trafficking, with some high-level people involved in that. Better yet, this guy has a military background. He was a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne. He served active duty in the U.S. Army JAG Corps, and he was both a military prosecutor and a military magistrate judge. Now we get to Ratcliffe. Who is Ratcliffe? Director of National Intelligence. He took office 6 months before the election. Prior to that, where was he? He was the Chief of Counterterrorism and National Security within our Justice Department. Earlier this year, he said, and this was before the election, Ratcliffe said that the biggest threat to election security in the U.S. is the Chinese Communist Party. Quote, China poses a greater national security threat to the U.S. than any other nation, economically, militarily, and technologically. That includes threats of election influence and interference. That is a direct quote from Ratcliffe. Then we have Ratcliffe's office, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, recently repeatedly warning about malign foreign influences and saying that they are most concerned, and I quote again, about ongoing potential activity by China, Russia, and Iran. And then earlier this year, we saw the Director of National Intelligence tell both the House and Senate Select Committees on Intelligence that they could take a hike, that they were no longer going to be given in-person briefings about election security and foreign election interference. And of course, Pelosi and Adam Schiff pitched an absolute fit about that. They called it shocking and unfair. And guess who is still carved out of those briefings? They are Congress. Okay. And then recently, what else did we see along those same lines? We saw the Director of National Intelligence and his friends cutting Biden's transition team out of briefings as well. Okay, what else has gone on with Ratcliffe and Director of National Intelligence Office in recent days? They have acknowledged, this is a CBS interview I'm quoting from, that the election suffered from foreign interference. Ratcliffe leads the 17 intelligence agencies, and he has access to the most highly classified information that is held by the US government. And he told CBS News that there was, quote, foreign interference by China, Iran, and Russia in November of this year, and that he is anticipating a report on those findings in January. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence has also said that they are going to be getting that intel report out soon. Of course, it was due on December 18th under the executive order that Trump passed back in September of 2018, but that deadline is getting missed. Now, do we know why that deadline is getting missed? I don't know. It could be that bad actors who hate Trump are sandbagging the issuance of that report through the National Intelligence Agency, or it could be that good actors are deciding to not release that yet. What you have to realize is we've got a number of irons in the fire. We've got court cases, we've got congressional, legislative actions that are set to play out. If we play all our cards now, we have no cards left to play later. That's just simple blackjack rules, hey, poker rules, card game rules, right? You sit on some cards, you have some moves to make later on down the line. Something to think with, whether this was intentional or not. In terms of the date sliding on the intelligence briefing, I don't know. But either way, whether it was intentional, whether it was the good guys doing it or the bad guys doing it, it leaves Trump with cards to play come January. Talking about that executive order, as you well know, there was an executive order passed in September of 2018 by Trump that declared a national emergency relative to foreign election interference and specified certain sanctions that could be taken against foreign actors who were involved in that. But buried in that report, or that executive order rather, which I did not catch in my first however many readings of it, was this one line. The report from the Director of National Intelligence, that is due 45 days after the election, shall also include updates and recommendations, when appropriate, regarding remedial actions to be taken by the US government. I repeat, Trump directed the Director of National Intelligence, when he authored the 45-day after the election interference report on the intelligence about who interfered, to also recommend remedial actions that could be taken by the U.S. government. Now, what does the word remedial mean? Taking the textbook dictionary definition, it means you're going to go remedy or cure a past wrongdoing. This is a total separate thing, if you ask me, from the sanctions that are set forth very clearly that we can take economically against foreign powers that interfered in our elections. This is talking about what the U.S. government can do upon a proper showing to cure whatever the hell went wrong with an election. So keep that in mind in coming weeks, guys. Other executive orders that have come out in very recent history that I think are fascinating. On November 12th, a few days after the election, we had an executive order that was titled, quote, addressing the threat from securities investments that finance communist Chinese military companies. Kind of interesting. Early weeks of December, we saw order of succession at Department of Defense executive order. Who's in charge chain of command-wise if somebody goes down at DOD? Same week that came out, we had one entitled Governments and Integration of Federal Mission Resilience. And it stated it is the policy of the U.S. to maintain comprehensive and effective continuity programs that ensure national security and the preservation of government structure. And then he went on to say the Executive Office of the President must maintain capability and capacity to continuously perform national essential functions. And then he directed an executive committee to get together within 90 days of that order and start getting down to brass tacks. 90 days from that order is March. On 12/22, we had a memo from Trump that allowed the Attorney General the authority to use classified information in connection with review of intelligence activities. I'm going to ask you guys this, and I think it's fairly self-evident, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Does this sound like a person who thinks he's going to be golfing on January 30th at Mar-a-Lago? He gives a shit who his SecDef is. He gives a shit who the Pentagon officials are. He cares about who's acting Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General. He's having SOCOM, Special Operations Command, report directly to him, essentially, through Chris Miller. He's got continuity of programs for national security. He's cutting Biden and Congress out of defense intelligence briefings right now. Every other term, every other person he's appointed to replace the heads that are rolling has experience with counterterrorism, with sex trafficking, with military prosecutions and judging. Okay, is this a coincidence? I think it's not. Either the guy has lost his freaking mind or he has a plan. I think it's the latter. Okay. Finally, the Kraken Report that came out, 270 pages. I'm not going to go all the way through it. We'd be here all night. A couple of highlights. 1,222 votes out of 1,491. So 1,200 votes out of about 1,500 votes were reversed in one county. 82% rejection rate. Okay, when you send these things for adjudication, we know the Dominion servers allow people to just shove it over to be whoever's vote they want. Okay, and we had the vast majority, over 81% of these having gone that way in a certain county. There were algorithms that were being used, 2/3 to Biden, 1/3 to Trump, fractional weighting of votes. We have equipment that was being manufactured in Russia, in China, and other foreign countries that was being used to count votes here. On page 125 of that 270-page report that Sidney Powell released, we've got Andy Wang featured. Who is Andy Wang? He was the IT infrastructure manager at Dominion. Okay, he was the guy in control of how Dominion worked. Guess what else he did in his past before working for Dominion? He worked at China Telecom between 1998 and 2002. China Telecom is a company that is wholly run by the Chinese government. Our U.S. Department of Defense identified Chinese Telecom as having collaborated with Chinese military for over 20 years, and the Department of Homeland said we need to do a complete ban on them. Right? And now we've got guys who are being appointed who have experience prosecuting Chinese telecom companies. A coincidence? I think not. Okay, we've got Neil Shen. Who is he? A Chinese guy. He founded Sequoia Capital. Who are they? The guys who funded Dominion. You know, you've got foreign election interference 8 ways to Sunday. On page 172 of that report, you've got an affidavit stating, in my professional opinion, there is unambiguous evidence that Dominion and Edison research have been accessible and were certainly compromised by rogue actors like Iran and China. These organizations neglectfully allowed foreign adversaries to access data and intentionally provided access to their infrastructure in order to monitor and manipulate the most recent 2020 election. The final thing Sidney Powell did in that Kraken report is she included the 2018 executive order. Coincidence? I doubt it. So we've got some themes, guys. We've got foreign election interference. We've got China over and over again. We've got counterterrorism. We've got military. We've got the cutting out of Congress and Biden from intel briefings, but not Pence. Lynn Wood came out a couple days ago and said, we have an epidemic of judges who are refusing to hear cases. Why? This is what he said. I wonder how many of those judges are familiar with the surveillance program named Sunset, or what that illegal spying program revealed about them. Okay, this is a guy, Lynn Wood is not just any attorney. He specializes in defamation suits. I know attorneys and judges in Georgia who are like, Lynn Wood doesn't say stuff if he can't back it up, folks. I think it is an absolute disservice to be calling this foreign election interference. We are asking judges and elected legislators to handle what is essentially an act of war. If we had China sending in foot soldiers to take over the government by way of little Chinese communist soldiers running across the White House lawn and overthrowing the White House right now, we would not go running to our nearest black robe judge and say, hey, Your Honor, help us handle this. We would use our military to suppress it. Okay, so hypothetically, what I think is going on right now is you've got two different paths going on. You've got a president who understands what the appetite of the average American is geared toward. We've got the attention span of a gnat. We have the endurance of somebody who's never run a marathon, let alone a lap around the high school track when it comes to this type of process. And we've got we've got a willingness by the White House and our leaders to say, let's let this play out in the courts, in the legislatures, with Congress on January 6th. And then we've got a separate road going on, if you look at the dots I just connected, that is an entirely separate path that I think is going to be accessed if we don't get to where we need to go with the more traditional routes. The final thing I would say, guys, is we have a job to do. And this is not the job that you go to every day where you get a paycheck. This is the same job that you would have if a robber or a rapist showed up at your back door at 3 a.m. and said they were going to slaughter your family. And you might be a paraplegic, and you might be fat, and you might be 95 years old, and you might have never fought a fist fight in your life. But I am willing to bet my last dollar that you would, out of sheer necessity and dint of willpower, fight the good fight to protect your family. And you would probably win, because every fight is fought here before it is fought anywhere else. We are being asked right now to protect something that is possibly as important as our family, and that is our country, because without a free country to live in, we don't have a free and safe family. Your president has asked you to go on January 6th to Washington, D.C. Flynn's family is asking you to go. I'm asking you to go. I'm going to be speaking again on the U.S. Supreme Court steps between 2 and 5 p.m. on Tuesday, January 5th, and staying for whatever the goat rope or rodeo is on January 6th. Okay, we have 80 million people who voted for Trump. We have half the states in this country who signed on to the Texas lawsuit and said, we believe there were issues that need to be decided of election integrity. And we have 20 or 30%, depending on which poll you look at, of Democrats who did not vote for Trump, who also said they believe this election was stolen at this point in time. These people need to show up in force in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, because before you are a spouse or a mother or a brother or a friend, you are a citizen. And it sends a very clear message when 80 million people show up that we are not going to stand for any more shenanigans from our government. That government serves at our election. Their house is actually our house. And when those votes are counted by Pence and his friends on January 6th, we need to be there in person to ensure there is integrity in that process, and to also send one hell of a message as to what will happen if there's not. And on that final note, I'll see you in a couple days in Washington, D.C. January 5th, 2 p.m. Supreme Court steps, and January 6th all over the Capitol. Have a good one. Have a good New Year, and I'll see you there, guys.